start taking a look at Meghan Markle's series. And it's rough. We all already know that it's been panned by critics. It has horrible reviews. We're going to dive in deeper to some of those reactions and the response to the series in an upcoming video, as well as the PR mistakes that she made, some of the peak cringe, how this is impacting her public view at this time. But I thought for the series recaps, I would maybe do something a little bit different. I have always been really drawn to the domestic arts. Even as a child, I would clean my family's entire house, do the laundry, cooking and cleaning, all of those sorts of things. I've always been very into that. It's as if throughout childhood I was practicing to become a mom and run a house and be a wifey. Like, that was my goals. And so I'm very interested in these sorts of things in terms of what I like to do, and what I prefer to spend my time doing is these types of things, cooking and organizing, making a nice and pleasant home. So I thought it would be interesting to look at her series from that perspective of a homemaker, of a mom, of a home cook. I cook the majority of my family's meals from scratch, and so I thought it would be interesting to look at her series from that perspective. Because when we think about Meghan Markle's Netflix show, it's challenging to know exactly what her audience was. Obviously, it seems like her audience was in large part other wealthy people, specifically in Montecito. It seemed a little bit like a vanity project for her and her friends, or to show off to her friends. Alternatively, perhaps she was trying to appeal to other people who are interested in those things, because the subject matter does revolve around domestic arts. And so it would only make sense that she is at least trying to make an effort to appeal to that group, that crowd of people who are also interested in domestic arts for whatever reason, whether it is for hostessing or cooking, or just people who enjoy generally, like, homemaking sort of content where it's kind of peaceful and calm, is pleasant viewing for some people. And so since logically she had to have been trying to target that audience group, and I would belong to it, let's see if she can deliver anything interesting or valuable for her target audience. So our episode by episode recaps are going to be trickling out. I don't have a ton of time to sit down and binge this series. It's just not going to happen. So these will be trickling out nice and slow, but we'll be mixing in some reactions on the PR side of things and whatnot throughout the week as well. So be sure you subscribe so you do not miss anything. So episode 1 begins with her making some bath salts and bath bags. She says bath tea bags. That's fine, I suppose. Nothing too complicated, nothing very innovative here. But what really got me is that she mixes the first portion in a bowl. She mixes together Epsom salt, pink Himalayan salt, and some oils together with a wooden spoon till they're thoroughly mixed the way you would expect to see them. And then she's trying to fill this giant jar, and realizing that she's made far too little, instead of making a second batch in the bowl and mixing it to the same degree of quality as she did previously, instead, she just pours in a huge pile of Epsom salt and pours in a huge pile of pink salt and just kind of scatters it rather than really stir it in. And I don't think she added any oil to the rest of it. So it was very half-assed. Why are you doing that? You're on TV. You're being filmed. This is a once-in-a-lifetime shot to try to make this your thing, and you cut corners. Super odd choice. Super strange. It looked tacky and it looked amateur, much like the rest of the show. She's also hyping up her efforts a lot throughout the very first episode, straight out of the gate. It's very much placed within this context of, this is what I do to show I care. It's about how I'm feeling and what I want to do for people. And it's nice to want to do things for people, but it's most helpful, and of course, from the perspective of, not sounding like a narcissistic egomaniac, to think about it and formulate it within the context of how they're going to experience. Like, I hope they feel comfortable. I really want them to feel welcome. This is something that I hope feels comforting and relaxing or inviting, things like that. From the verbiage of speaking about the guests themselves rather than speaking about yourself constantly. She does this a lot. She also does this with every single thing that she makes and does on the show is, look what I made and look what I'm doing and look what we're doing. It's never about anything outward or even the things they're making themselves. At one point, her guest on episode 1, Daniel, tastes some jam, and instead of asking him whether he likes it or not or what he thinks, she just says, it's good. She tells him that it's good before he has a chance to answer or be asked whether he likes it or not. But the next thing that she does is she's preparing some snacks for Daniel because she wants to have a tray in his room that has the Epsom salts and the snacks. That's what she thinks is required, and some flowers. And so she pops some popcorn in the microwave, sprinkles it with a little salt, and then bags it. And then she takes out a bag of peanut butter pretzels and rebags it into a new plastic bag. And what I found was most peculiar wasn't necessarily the rebagging of the snacks, but the fact that she says, as she goes to reach for the pretzels, she says, since we put all our effort into making those, and points at the popcorn, we're going to just use these bagged pretzels. It's not naughty. As if popping popcorn takes any effort whatsoever. If that's effort to her, then I do not have any hope for this series because popping popcorn is the easiest thing you could do in the world besides opening a bag of pretzels. Honestly though, as a hostess myself, I actually prefer to leave things in their original packaging. She labels them in case somebody has allergies that this is peanut butter pretzels and this is truffle popcorn, but it's not just peanut butter that somebody might be looking out for or allergic to. There's other things as well, but also some people like myself like to see the nutritional content. Is there protein in this? What is in this? And so leaving it in its packaging allows the person to see the ingredients and the nutritional content for themselves. People might be avoiding certain ingredients as well, or they might be gluten sensitive. There's all sorts of different things, especially these days. So I just find transferring it into another plastic bag not only is kind of wasteful for the eco-warrior of Meghan to be just wasting more plastic, maybe she should have used a jar instead. That not only would have looked nicer and been more aesthetically pleasing, kept the snacks fresher, but also wouldn't be wasting plastic, but whatever. Still, transferring it away takes away the ingredients and the nutritional content that some people might be interested in seeing. But another layer to it is if you have a snack that you like and you're leaving it for your guests, leaving it in the packaging gives them the opportunity to be turned on to a new snack that they like, and maybe they can go and buy it for themselves. So I feel like it's not always the way to go to transfer things. Even as a guest, I would prefer to not have snacks or food handled unnecessarily. You know what I mean? Like, don't open the package and put it into a new package for no reason. You're handling the food. There's, cleanliness and contamination concerns. If I see something in some dodgy, just clear plastic bag like this, it's not as appealing or inviting in my opinion. I would rather open the package myself. Granted, treats and snacks is a lovely thing to leave in the room for your guests because sometimes when you're in somebody else's house and you're hungry before a dinner or something, you don't want to ask for a snack and seem rude or like you're impatient for the meal or something. So it's nice and a great idea to leave snacks, but not necessarily this way. This is much more likely to go stale, look like maybe it's been handled a lot, not the cleanest of options. It's not even that appealing the way they're just tied in these plastic bags where they're going to get a lot of air circulation as compared to the original packaging. So there's quality control issues as well. I don't know, maybe I'm nitpicking, but I'm a little picky about food, I guess. Daniel, the guest, is her makeup artist who she has known, as she says, before, during, and after, alluding to her time with the royals, but she could have just said since, 2005 or something. She could have just said that. But he arrives and she has prepared a crudité, just a board of chopped veggies and dips. And he says, how long did this take you? And she says, well, it's just chopping vegetables. It isn't perfect. And he says, well, it looks pretty perfect. And this is exactly what the series is. Her just declaring, oh, well, he must think it looks perfect, so I'm going to say it's not perfect so that he can say it is perfect. That's what a lot of this series is. Now, it's okay to hype each other up, but does it belong on TV? I think not. It's not interesting. It's not fun conversation. There's really no substance here. Which brings me to my next point, that there really isn't any substance to their conversation. At no point are they talking about anything really meaningful or interesting. There's no subject matter brought up that's like a cool conversation. And the director of this series is the guy who directed Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, which was a wonderful show. It was phenomenal. And so a lot of the visuals, cinematography of this series is only beautiful because of him. He is very talented. This must have been an incredible challenge for him, though, because Anthony would keep pace with his guests in the most entertaining and genuine of ways. They were enjoying their food. They were, sometimes getting messy, sometimes going on, random adventures and quests to get special ingredients and whatnot. And it was all very almost romantic to the area and the food, because you could tell how much they appreciated it and how comfortable it was. And his interactions with the chefs and the guests on the show were always so stimulating to watch, because they were talking about the dish that itself and the ingredients itself. They were talking about their experiences. They had shared experiences as chefs, so they had a lot of common ground to work with. They were talking about all kinds of things. The area, the local cuisine was all up for talking about, all relevant to the show. And so it was never dull, it was never boring, and it was always fabulous. And on top of it, Anthony was an incredibly talented writer, so he had a way with words. And because of the format of the show, Anthony was able to have footage roll and just do a voiceover explaining some of the stuff to sort of move the episode along at a nice pace, which really helped as well. Since Meghan's show doesn't have those same things, like any of those same things, I would imagine this was rather challenging for him to try to make this appealing in some way. I think he did a good job with the cinematography for sure. That was definitely the best part of it. But let's get back to some more nonsense from the Meg. This is how she cuts garlic. I can't even. And this is how she cuts chard. I can't even. These are two things that I use and make all of the time. And cutting it this way, I was afraid she was about to chop her little fingers off, because this was dangerous and hazardous, which shows the sort of amateur vibes, which, as a lot of people have pointed out, it's okay to not be an expert and to have a show where you're learning and trying new things. But it's not fun or pleasant to watch somebody who doesn't have like any degree of skill in the kitchen at all, because it's just kind of clumsy, I guess is the best word, and that's just not a very appealing thing to have to watch. On the contrary, it can actually get quite annoying to watch somebody sort of clumsily moving their way around the kitchen when they're trying to show somebody how to do something, because she's trying to like show Daniel some stuff and teach him some stuff, and it's just like, do you have your shit together? Because it doesn't look like it. When they start talking about the TIG at some point, she immediately turns the conversation into, oh, well, it was in the spirit of sharing things that I love. And that represents the whole show. She takes everything that the guest brings up and turns it back onto herself. Very predictable. We know this about Meghan, that she has a tendency to do this. And Daniel was saying that he goes, we had the TIG. So he was apparently really involved in it. He was the beauty editor, apparently. And Meghan doesn't give him any slack or leeway or opportunity to discuss this further or explain his experience more or what he's done since or anything. She just pivots it back to herself, and that kills the conversation, because then the other person gets that cue that, oh, you wanted to not talk about, or what I wanted to say, maybe I can't really say that now without it seeming weird, so I guess we're just moving on. And it drops the conversation right there and kind of cuts it short, instead of keeping it going in the sort of ping pong table tennis sort of a way that conversation is supposed to be. You're supposed to be hitting back and forth. You're supposed to be giving somebody something, and then they volley it back to you, and you volley it back to them. it's okay to give anecdotes and your personal opinion or bring it back to yourself, but you have to conclude that and punctuate it with sending it back over there to them so that they have something to say. So that also made it kind of frustrating and boring to watch because all the conversations just were deflated and just cut short and just blah. It's like they started going down a path, took a couple steps, and then Meghan just stops and blocks the path like, yeah, and it's about me. And then they head back to talking about Meghan, and the conversation's kind of over. Now, it's important to remember that there's nothing inherently wrong with that all by itself. These days, social media is like 90% just talking about yourself, what you cook, what you do, how you work out, like whatever it is, how you style or organize, whatever. A lot of social media is like that, just sharing parts of your life or your family or whatever. That is social media. And so it's become a lot more acceptable to, have that sort of self-centered presence as part of your experience in life and people's experience with you, where you're sharing stuff about yourself. But it quickly becomes boring and tiresome for people who don't actually know you and care about you. Like your friends and family should at least endlessly want to know more about what you're doing, no matter how mundane it is. And if you're an expert in any sort of a field, then you're delivering your knowledge to people, and that's a little bit different. But for most people, their social media feed is not for television. It doesn't make for a good show. And that's what this feels like. Meghan tried to make this her social media on steroids, and it's just boring. It comes across really dull. All of the conversation and the things that they're doing, none of it is innovative. There's no major accomplishments discussed or shown. There's no skills here. So what are we really supposed to latch onto? Watching two people reminisce about how they started working together a few decades ago is not good TV. It's boring. It just is. She makes a pasta dish with Daniel and she comments that, well, my kids aren't eating heaps of noodles, as if that would be a horrible thing. That felt a little targeted to her fellow Montecitans, the community there. She didn't want the other moms thinking that she feeds her kid pasta. But this was a missed opportunity here. She mentioned the kids, so why not mention what you do feed the kids, how you turn this into a dish that they like or a dish that they'll eat? What do you do to make pasta more healthy for them? I personally use protein pasta. It's made with chickpea powder as part of the flour content. It has a little bit more body to the flavor. These are the types of tips and tricks that would have given her show some degree of substance. It would have given people perhaps a new idea that they haven't seen already, like the one pot pasta. By the way, hers came out looking watery and overdone. Not al dente in the slightest. Didn't look very good. She also made lumpy cake batter, and using Ziploc baggies as piping bags is great if you're really in a pinch and you have nothing better to use, but reusable would be more eco-friendly. Once again, the eco warriors, Harry and Meghan, made a big song and dance about how much they care about the environment and people should take airplanes less often, only to turn around and take private jets everywhere themselves and waste excess plastic in the kitchen, apparently. When they were making the cake, they marinated a little bit too long, talking about how the cake is pretty on the inside. The naked cakes are just pretty on the inside, like people who you really got to get to know. They went on and on about this, and then they came back to get the cake to eat it, and they talked about it more, about how it's just pretty on the inside. They droned on and on about this for so much airtime that it was clear they really didn't have anything else to talk about. She also paired these raspberries rather than placing them in threes, which threes always look better. Perhaps it's supposed to be representative of what she has taken from Harold. I don't know. But pairing raspberries in threes is 100% of the time going to look better. Really, any garnish threes is going to look a lot better. The best part of this show, as I said, is the cinematography. The director, Michael Steed, has done better than anybody could. And that's clear. I don't think anybody else could really get much out of this. Upon conclusion of the first episode, what really stood out to me was it didn't make me feel like doing, trying, or having any of the stuff shown in the video. So, whether it's hosting or cooking focused, anytime food and drink is involved in a show where that's the focus, it should ideally make you desire to have some for yourself. You should want to have a slice of that cake, or a cup of that coffee or tea, or a bowl of that pasta. It really should invoke that in yourself. You should walk away from the show or be sitting there watching the show thinking, oh my gosh, that looks delicious. I wish I could try that or have that. And I just didn't get that here. And that's something that Anthony Bourdain's show did have. You did leave it craving, wanting to try that or go to that area, travel there and see for yourself the beautiful area and try these restaurants for yourself and try the local, hot spots for yourself. But with this, I had absolutely no desire to try any of the stuff because it just didn't look that great despite having beautiful cinematography. He did everything he could to try to make it look good. It was the food itself that didn't look very tasty, unfortunately. Some things that could have improved it would have been pressing just a little bit further. If she would have gone just a few steps farther on most of these moments, it would have been vastly improved by the way of delivering some degree of value. They really gave us nothing in this. It was all quite amateur. And allegedly, it's supposed to be, but if that's the case, she should have made that more clear. They've come out now that there's been criticism to say, yeah, Meghan, what is an amateur? She isn't trying to be, a chef. And we purposefully left in here showing her, looking around the kitchen like she didn't know what was happening. Okay, but they didn't make that clear, and so it came across poorly. It came across like she was trying to impersonate somebody who knew what they were doing, which is a fail. It's either a fail in the way they packaged and delivered it, or just a general fail in the fact that they agreed to do this particular format of show. As I said, their conversation wasn't really interesting. It was more, look what we did. This doesn't have to be perfect, and this is what we did. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We're doing it because it's fun, and we enjoy it, and that's why we're doing it, and look what we did. That was all they talked about. And then they just punctuated it with, we did it with intention. Cool. You can do a lot of things, anything really, good or bad, with intention. That doesn't immediately make it fantastic. I will be back with more soon. Thank you for joining me for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have a happy day ahead. I'll see you next time. Bye. Which means this show really did nothing to counter the information that we have about Meghan's personality at this point. It did nothing to counter this sort of reputation of being bossy and difficult and not very nice and things like that. So it didn't provide at the end of the day, no matter how hard Meghan tried, it didn't provide a different version of Meghan to the audience. It only reinforced much of what we already knew and showed us her ability to try to portray something else and fail at it. Bad acting. Had she been capable of guiding rather than bossing around, the way we've seen Ina Garten do with her guests or certain other celebrity chef moments, they kind of guide their guest in something, and it feels a lot more friendly and a lot more collaborative and a lot less judgy. That could have helped. But the way Meghan approached it just came off really bossy. And that could have been helped by the director if he would have maybe, pushed a little bit towards a different approach, or the producers in general. But I guess Meghan was the main producer. So that there wasn't much hope to challenge her vision for this show, really. Michael, the director, that's his name, right? Yeah, Michael Steed, the director, he ultimately is trying to deliver what the producers ask for. And since Meghan produced it, she's definitely got a lot of control over this project. So it's safe to assume this is how she wanted to do things, and this is what her vision was. But it wasn't the right vision or the right approach if her goal was to actually sell a rebrand, and if her goal was actually to shift the public opinion about her and show a different side to herself and sort of change these ideas around her that she is sort of got a lot of negative personality traits that are off-putting, rather, to put it one way. So if her goal was to try to shift that and step away from those off-putting traits, she should have gone with a different format. So largely the responsibility for that failure to accomplish a change in her public image should go on Meghan's shoulders because she is the producer and the star of the show. Michael could have done a little bit as the director, but not a ton. Really, it was down to the concept, and that comes down to Meghan. Having friends and guests on the show was a good idea. That aspect of the format of the show was a positive because it allowed her the opportunity, setting aside the fact that she kind of failed to reach potential here, it provided Meghan the opportunity to be a little bit more dynamic and friendly, to show a different side of herself. It opened up the door to having different types of conversations and being more warm, to showcase a more personable and friendly and charismatic vibe. And that can take a little pressure off the host, in this case Meghan. It can take a little pressure off the host of the show and be able to push a little bit more of the show onto the guest. Like, you're wanting to learn more about the guest, you're wanting the guest to do more talking, more sharing about them. That's always a likable thing too, whenever if you're in a social situation and you're a little nervous or you're not super confident with conversating or conversing. If you're not confident in the dynamic or the space that you're in, or you just don't know a lot of people, so you're a little unsure, just getting other people to do the talking is always going to be the safe bet. You come off a little bit more likable. You avoid looking like you're doing too much talking or unnecessary sharing, those sorts of egotistical vibes. You avoid that altogether, and you're putting the attention on those around you, and you simultaneously get to learn more about the people you're with at any given moment, which is always a good thing, and there's always something interesting to learn about others. So in that dynamic, in theory, it would be beneficial for Meghan because she could spend more of her time asking people things and getting her guests to do the talking. But she didn't. She didn't take that opportunity. Puzzlingly, this show didn't fulfill that. It didn't have that because she's not a very good conversationalist. She doesn't volley back to whomever it is that she's speaking to. And she didn't really have entertaining, warm conversations that made you feel like you were part of that group. That's something that a lot of really successful hosts in this sort of genre have, like Stanley Tucci's, what was it, Searching for Italy or something like that? That was such a good show. I think it was on CNN. I wish it would come back. That was such a beautiful show. It was one of my favorites. I was excited for every episode and every season, and it's ended, which is sad. Anthony Bourdain had it. We had talked about that. Ina Garten definitely has it. And lots of other successful cooking and sort of homemaking lifestyle content creators have it. A lot of people say Rachel Ray does a really good job of this. I don't watch her show very much, so I can't really speak to that for sure. But a lot of people say she has that warm dynamic that, does a lot of welcoming and friendly vibes with her guests where they get to do a lot of the talking. And when you have that, particularly with like Stanley and Ina and Anthony, you feel like you're almost at the table with these people listening in on a very interesting conversation that's engaging, and you want to hear more from the guests and you want to hear that back and forth, and it has a good pace to it, and it makes you feel like you're there. This just didn't have that. It felt bland and cold, and very much so mostly overthought. It felt contrived. It felt overworked, overdone, overly tweaked. It kind of reminded me of some of the films we've seen lately that have, and shows that had one idea as the project started, and then they had to pivot and change it for whatever reason. And then we got something that felt pieced together and overly edited, like you were cutting and pasting a picture that had been torn apart back together. It's not quite right. It didn't quite work. It kind of felt like that. Like they did all the filming and then the editing, and then Meghan got in there and started reworking things or wanting things to be different, or the test groups came back with some feedback and they were trying to salvage it. That's what a lot of the episodes felt like. And with the conversation, it was very much that way. There's reports now from insiders that worked on the show that Meghan had to put in voiceovers after the fact of asking questions to her guests because she didn't ask them any questions. And so when they were offering up information or talking, they were just kind of, it was an awkward silence, and then they were like, well, I did this when I was a kid, or oh, I know about this thing or the other thing, and they made Meghan do voiceovers to make it seem like she was asking, to try to make her seem less self-centered, which is embarrassing. Even if it's not true, it's embarrassing press to have out there. And if it is true, I mean, it's not surprising to anybody who's followed Meghan's, story or journey, really, or who've, paid much attention, but regardless, that could have been helped by changing the way she approached conversations with the guests and putting more of the focus on the guests. So while that element of the show was a good idea of having friends and guests, that was a good idea. And it did help. Like in episode 3 with Roy, it was the best episode because he was there and offering actual value and information about the things he was cooking. And that really did make a difference to the show at the end of the episode, of feeling like you saw something that was at least interesting and, showed you something new that you didn't already know. Not like rebagging pretzels, which we already know about because we all figured it out. We've done it our whole lives. Roy's episode was something different and new. And so if that format would have been enhanced with better conversations, it would have helped. But she fell short there. Another thing about this series that really came up short and sort of undermined its efforts for Meghan was her lack of expertise and lack of interesting ideas. This also contributed to the inability to help create a better version of Meghan to be presented to the public, to change people's perception of her as a human, because it put a lot more weight on Meghan just carrying the show with herself, like just her personality and her charisma and her as a person. The approach that she took put all of the weight on the show on her, because the recipes were lacking. The tutorials were so basic and common sense that they were incredibly boring. It was mostly common sense stuff that they didn't even need a tutorial at all. Like, who can't figure out how to pop popcorn or make a balloon arch? What? Who can't figure that out? Okay, show me the people who need a tutorial on that and who will actually find their way to Meghan's thing instead of a video on YouTube for free, okay? Ridiculous. So the content itself was ill-suited to the audience, but additionally, because it lacked substance and because she wasn't bringing any value in terms of the actual content itself, of interesting tutorials that are useful or recipes that are new or useful, she lacked that. She lacked letting the guests take some of the weight by not engaging them in valuable or interesting conversation. So then the entire show was on her shoulders. She needed to be incredibly entertaining and dynamic to make this format work, and she wasn't. A public relations analysis during the show concept and planning phases would have surely found this format to be rather high risk because of those factors, and could have laid out a better guidance for her, or a better template for her of like, okay, if you really want to do this format of show, then you need to come in with questions the way a normal talk show person has questions on a card of what they're going to ask the person that they're interviewing, so that they don't get lost or fumble or just not have an entertaining conversation. She needed to come in with talking points that would have interest to the viewers and be entertaining to listen to, better substance on her tutorials and her ideas of what they were actually going to show and include in the episodes. That would have helped make this more possible and more successful. And if they had done a public relations or public image analysis while planning, they would have caught this and been able to avoid it and been like, this is going to come across this way. This runs a high risk of coming across this way. Let's try to safeguard against that risk and lower that risk and make it a little bit more balanced. But because of that, And none of that was done, and none of those conversations were had, or if they were, Meghan just ignored them. It gave a lot more opportunity to fail and a lot more chance to not come across the way they wanted it to. And it gave a very low return in that she wasn't offering up anything worth our time anyway. So even if she weren't charismatic or if she was super bossy, if her ideas were great and the results were impressive, or the recipes or tutorials were new and valuable, it still would have had a better chance by a lot because of undeniable skill, like Chef Ramsay or even Martha Stewart clearly are kind of perfectionists with their craft. You know, Chef Ramsay sometimes is a little abrasive, or a lot of people don't like his personality or his approach. I don't mind it, but a lot of people do. And some people think Martha is a little bit uptight or a little too particular with her approach. But it shows the skill and the knowledge that she has, and that she's willing to go the extra mile to make it perfect, to make it the product good in the end. Then you can't deny the skill that is there. And so the, people who were maybe off put by the personality or, didn't quite click with the charisma of the host, that isn't as important as the skill and the value that they're bringing. So if Meghan had better value, it would have lowered the weight that was put on her charisma. And if she would have upped her game with the guests, it would have lowered the amount of weight that was put on her shoulders with carrying the show on just charisma and personality alone, which was lacking. Unfortunately, this project, has only been yet another example of a failed endeavor for Meghan. The content itself can't ride on just having pretty shots or soft living examples, and it certainly can't ride on one of the most disliked public figures of all time. So when it comes to her public image, she ultimately worsened her social reputation, that she really isn't very charming. She is bossy, and she is self-centered. She didn't care to learn about the guests, and she didn't care about the viewers enough to deliver them any value. Perhaps if the goal was exclusively to market herself as the it socialite of Montecito specifically, or if her goal was to elevate herself to the level of Goop, Gwyneth Paltrow, I don't know, it may have had some degree of success in that little tiny bubble. And if that was the means to the end for her, then fine. I guess she got what she wanted. She showed her Montecito friends that she really does have a Netflix deal, and maybe that's all she really wanted. Maybe it really is a smaller scale for Meghan. Maybe she really doesn't care to appeal to the plebs of the world. We don't really know. But when it comes to her public image, it definitely didn't work out well. It ended up giving a lot more ammo, so to speak, for criticisms. And in this case, at a much greater scale and with much more legitimacy and sort of an undeniable legitimacy. Before, people had to do a little bit of digging to figure out or learn about the goings-on with the Meg, to verify that she had been lying on Oprah and in Netflix, that she was being difficult when she was with the royal family, that she did treat people poorly, that there was valid bullying reports that she was not being nice to certain female members of staff. People had to sort of investigate Meghan's history and the stories about her to verify which side was right. Now, people can just plainly see that she made a terrible Netflix show that bombed and was panned by critics and audience alike, and a failure of this nature on this scale is a really big deal. Her profile of projects are all one-off and letdowns and failures and abandoned ideas, and it's a long list now, and this is the most high-profile and expensive of them all. So it's bad news career-wise, like trajectory-wise, as well as public image. And it's one of those situations where it's like, well, if you don't know if you like Meghan or not and you watch this show, chances are you're either going to be bored, find it to have very little value, or you're going to come away from it not really liking her because she just didn't come across authentic and whatnot. And so it was a bigger risk, public relations-wise. Even more so, I would say, than some of her versions of events that she had said about the royal family. Because even though Oprah was a huge scale and the Netflix documentary was a huge scale, people still, who were casual observers, didn't know the backstory and had to take it upon themselves to go and find the other side to those stories, or the truth at the center of those stories. We're not talking about facts that have happened and truths that have happened and Meghan's version and everyone else's version of events. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about delivering a Netflix show that is a creative project, and it fell short in almost every metric. And so an audience who doesn't know anything about all the other nonsense and never would research the facts about Meghan's tall tales will just see this. This is it. And so there was a lot riding on making it a success for Meghan. And even the marketing of the show wasn't a huge problem. It really came down to the content itself. A giant, nearly 8-hour nothing burger. And her performance being dull and boring and unfriendly for lack of interest in her guests and simply egotistical. That's the impression she left the viewers with. So it really fell short when it came to a public image or PR exercise, trying to shift her vibe, because she did introduce this as the new version of Meghan that we're all supposed to get on board with. Leave it in the comments what you think. Thank you for joining me for today's video. I hope you have a happy day ahead, and I will see you next time. Bye. Ugh, it's here. Much to the public's dismay, With Love Meghan released Part 2, packaged and marketed as Season 2. Whole different mess, whole different can of worms there. And Meghan has gone on to make the same mistakes that she's been making this whole time, learning from absolutely nothing. So we knew what day the With Love Meghan episodes were going to be released. They announced that a few weeks ago, at least a couple weeks ago. But then Meghan made this mistake again, where she crowded that day and had multiple things released or announced or talked about on that same exact day. And this is a mistake because it doesn't allow a good spread throughout the news cycle. It minimizes the number of days that you will be coming up in the news cycle because you get it all done in the same day. But also it kind of floods the information in a way where people miss some of the stuff. They hear that the episodes are coming out that day, but then they have no idea the other stuff that you have going on that day. And that is bad business. It's bad PR. It's a mistake. We've talked about this before. So she did 3 things in one day. She released the episodes. Well, Netflix released the episodes. She made more products available on the As Ever site, and the Bloomberg interview went live all on the same day. So let's start with the whole releasing of products. You know how Netflix warned us what day we could expect With Love Meghan to grace our screens? Well, Meghan didn't do that for her product drop this time around, or really any other time around. It's always a surprise. An unwelcome one at that, but she completely skipped over this really important step, especially in retail and products like this, direct-to-consumer goods, of warming up the consumer and letting them know that there will be some stuff available on such and such dates. I mean, it's not like many people are all that excited to buy her products. The demand is inflated in the media thanks to the Sussex's press releases. The demand is actually quite low, and we know this. There's a very small number of people who were like waiting on the edge of their seats to buy more products. But even still, she didn't warn these supposed fans to be ready, that they could count on products coming available. I mean, you know, real people have budgeting things or timing things where maybe they would want to be available or pencil it in for their lunch break that day or have a little extra spending cash available that week. Had people been warned and known that the products were going to come available, she didn't do this. She skipped this step. And then to have the Bloomberg interview on top of it, it just crowded everything in the news. And I believe the reason why she did this and had all three things happen at once and didn't really prime the public for it was so that all the news would happen on the same day on purpose in order to minimize the presence of the negative reviews of her show to be in the news cycle. You know what I mean? She crowded the news on purpose to stifle those reviews in a rather sad attempt to hide her failures. Because now the news cycle, anybody coming around and looking at it has this wide variety of different things going on and being reported on, and it's not all just negative reviews about With Love Meghan, which is what, all the reviews that I've seen so far have been negative, including my own. But anyway, let's start with the trailer that they released. I have been sick. Thank you all for your well wishes. I do so appreciate it. That was really sweet of you guys. I just wanted to let you know why I was late to get new content out to you. This month has been a little crazy for me. But anyway, let's start with the preview because I have not talked about this. The highlight, I guess you could call it, of this preview is the dislike ratio on this thing. Look, when I took this screenshot, it had 451,000 views about, and only 3,500 likes. But there was almost 37,000 dislikes, 36,699 dislikes, which is a 91% dislike rate. That is extreme. And the vast majority of those almost 17,000 comments were negative or poking fun at the whole thing, which makes sense. But it was kind of funny to see the dislike ratio on this when you pair that with how Meghan and Netflix are trying to package this as more was wanted when clearly it wasn't. They are very much trying super, super hard with packaging this second season, which, as we have discussed, I don't want to sound like a broken record saying it every single time, so I'm not going to say it after today. This is just part 2. They filmed all of these episodes at once. Last summer, August 2024 and July 2024, I think were the dates. It might have just been July. Anyway, they filmed it in the summer of 2024. All of these together. And they have released them as 2 seasons. But really, it's just parts 1 and part 2 of 1 season. Because typically, when you shoot something with the intention of it being 2 separate seasons, you don't always do it so close together back to back. But it makes sense why they had to, because Meghan was renting out or had her friend lend her the guest house that she used as a set. So they did kind of need to, I can understand why they filmed both of them back to back. But when you film something back to back, you're doing it all in one big batch. It's all written at the same time. It's all in pre-production at the same time. And then it's all in post-production at the same time, pretty much. So it really is just part 1 and part 2 of 1 season. But calling it season 2 is just marketing. It's a split season is a good way to think of it. But they have really tried to pivot this, even just the preview, as something a little bit different. They're trying to convey that they have made some changes, even just in the preview, to what we experienced in season 1. But the fact that this was all filmed at one time and has been split and released 2 separate times, this batch has been released 13 months after filming. Why does that matter? Well, first off, it means that the content is going to be even more stale than it already feels. One of the biggest criticisms of the first part, the season 1, was how the whole thing felt like a Pinterest board at least a decade old. Meghan's approach and the visual elements and the things that she was making or cooking or doing in the show all felt like older ideas, things that we saw 10 years ago, which made it uninteresting and useless to the target audience. But it also felt very boring because it was all stuff we've seen before. But to have the footage itself also be over a year old now makes it feel even more stale. It just accentuates that feeling. And we see this a lot, especially if there's delays in a project, even with really popular shows or films, movies that people are expected to love and have been waiting and there's anticipation for it, series that people love. By the time they get around to the last season, if there was a delay in production or a delay with writing, like we saw a lot with the writers' strikes, the SAG strikes, and things like that went on within Hollywood, the TV shows and the movies got pushed pause on and delayed. Then the whole thing ended up feeling kind of stale, and a lot of those movies that were affected by those strikes didn't perform as well, and a lot of the shows didn't perform as well, and the audience didn't like the stories as much, in large part because that big delay did create a sort of stagnant feel to the content itself and to the stories, and then it just didn't hit the same. It didn't feel as fresh or exciting because those stories and the storylines had been written a little bit too long ago. Even just like the character arcs started to feel a little bit dated by the time a film or a show gets completed after a lot of delays. And so it's not unique to just Meghan's show here, but it is something that could have been avoided for Meghan's show. She didn't necessarily have to film it all at once and then wait an entire 13 months to release it. They could have either released it quicker or just gone with 2 separate filming sessions. It would have been a little bit more expensive and a little bit more challenging, but it would have kept the content feeling more fresh and given her the opportunity to make improvements before season 2 came around. And given the fact that Meghan's show concept was already boring and stale, now having been sitting around for 13 months, it feels archaic at this point. And it also matters in terms of the editing. The trailer this time around is even more so heavily edited than the first one, like aggressively. Take this moment here. You can tell that it's been cut right before she's about to say another word.
Love the idea of spending time together, spending time together, spending time together, spending time together.
And throughout the trailer, it's so choppy for a production that boasts 80 people and a big budget studio like Netflix to make this happen. It should not have choppy editing, but it does because of Meghan and the quality not being there. So what does this choppy nature really tell us? It indicates that they've worked really hard to either edit her footage into something else or try to make repairs. This looks like a giant cut and paste project where they've had to fix it to make it less terrible. I'm sure the team and or Meghan immediately regretted filming it all at once last summer because it robbed them of the chance to take the feedback and shift her approach to something more likable, better suited for TV, less boring and bland. You know, any degree of improvement has been diminished because they cannot reshoot this nonsense. It's not making Netflix hardly any of their investment back, and they're just trying to scrape this together and salvage it somehow, and it really does feel like a cut and paste project. So instead, in their process of trying to salvage this project's footage for this part 2 and contort it into something more appealing than it is, they have added a lot of voiceovers of Meghan. That's relatively economical to do, to just have her come back in and do some voiceovers. But they cannot fix the entire thing with just voiceovers alone. I predict an incredibly choppy experience watching this show, an abrupt set of episodes with several obviously doctored voiceovers that feels incredibly disjointed. That is my prediction. I'm going to start watching it, and I'm going to film the reviews and try to get them out to you in a row. Maybe I'll throw in an intermission of that Bloomberg interview review. But it's obvious that Netflix has heard the feedback as well. We can deduce from their heavily edited trailer here the way that they're trying to package this. They understand the criticisms, all right? Take, for example, the fact that they had Meghan say things like, "I'm so glad you're here to teach me this" in the preview. They want her to, at least in the preview, come across as a learner, because that was one of the major criticisms of part 1, that she doesn't have the expertise to be trying to teach these things. She's not very good at it. She's not a natural teacher. Some people are. The best teachers that you can remember had that natural, engaging way of leading you down a lesson. Meghan doesn't have that. And they desperately want people to give it a second chance. Largely, it looks like more of the same. As we know, since it was all filmed at once, there can't really be that many changes made in post-production. Editing can only take you so far. If the content that you have to work with is of the same quality as the first batch, then this show is going to be more of the same. Duh. People have also taken issue with the guest selection. For example, we have several guests that simply aren't really going to draw the audience in. Guests who the general public are not familiar with are not going to draw eyeballs. Like, for example, Daniel, the makeup artist, or her other friend, Heather. Like, these are people that the general public aren't going to tune in to see. But then there's also controversial people like Chrissy Teigen. I don't think that this would be as controversial if Meghan didn't try to claim that she is leading the way with online safety and anti-bullying. You know what I mean? She and Harry, they even did that Jane Pauley interview. They have tried to make it known that they are against online bullying and they are going to champion this cause. And yet she has somebody who's infamous for that very thing on her show. I'm sorry. How does that work? How does that even happen? She and Harry, even though we know that they aren't really doing much in this arena, they claim to care about this subject. They say that they care about online bullying and online safety, especially for children. So then, where is your action to back that up in real life with your choices? Why would you have someone who was essentially canceled by the public and lost fans and deals due to her behavior of online bullying somebody who was, I think at the time, a teenager? Why would she come on your show? It maketh no sense. Explain it. It's just a very strange choice, and it sends a weird message. It undermines either one or the other. You know, it either becomes this see-through situation where she's so desperate that she'll take anybody on her show, whether it aligns with her values or not. Therefore, she has no backbone and she's just doing this to try to make her show work, which is a selfish sort of a thing to do, questions your ethics. Or she doesn't actually care about online bullying and she doesn't actually care about creating a safer space online for children, because if she did, she would be setting an example and not associate with somebody who is like one of the most infamous online bullies of the current moment, because all that came out not that long ago. It still feels kind of fresh with Chrissy's name. So it can't be both. It's one or the other. It's hypocritical. It's undermining her message, her morals here. And it's just a super weird choice. Pre-bullying scandal Chrissy would have made sense, because Chrissy was in the space of a more relatable foodie type of vibe of cooking, and I think she had a cookbook. I think she had some cookware for sale at Target, I think. And her social media was her medium. She didn't do like a Netflix show or anything like that, I don't believe. I think she just did it on social media. I mean, I wasn't like paying super close attention or anything, but that's what I kind of remember hearing about. And so before this bullying stuff happened, Chrissy would have been a great fit. But because it happened and because of the way Meghan has positioned herself, it doesn't. And this harkens back to that conflict that Queen Elizabeth II made clear to Harry and Meghan, that you really can't do both. You can't claim to be living a life of service and supporting charitable causes and initiatives and trying to support some things that you think are super important, like online bullying or whatever it is. You can't do that and focus on these for-profit things, because you end up with all these conflicts of interest and competing interests as well. As for the other guests, the lack of chemistry seems to be out in full force with this set of guests also. So I'm not really expecting any true improvements. But how about you? What are your predictions for this season? I am kind of surprised in a way that they managed to get some of her As Ever products available again, timed for the release of these episodes, because that was the whole point, was to have the products and the show happening at the same time in harmony together. But at the time of prepping this video, absolutely nothing has sold out at this point, which means two things. They probably did stock more. She claimed in her Bloomberg interview that they stocked infinitely more, which is a mistake, and we will talk about that when we talk about the interview. But also, there is a lot less interest and a lot less buzz around this time. So she is going to see, surely, her sales plateau now that the initial reviewer spike has ended. When she made more wine available and it didn't sell, they tried to boast that 10,000 bottles were sold within the first day or something like that. But that's only about 833 cases. That's absolutely nothing in terms of a wine sale when you speak about business terms of how many cases sold create a success. Even the smallest of limited collections expect to sell at least 1,000 cases. Boutique and small wineries expect to sell 50,000 cases to have a successful year. So that just puts it into context for you on just how badly this is going and how slow the product is moving. And as we discussed before, the first few drops were a false precedent of people wanting to do the reviews. So if you scale based on those first few, when you're somebody like Meghan, who's really controversial and has a lot of people interested in making reviews, whether you agree with that or not, then you're going to have a skewed number in the beginning. And you need to wait until those numbers stabilize before you make decisions on how you scale. And it sounds like she didn't do that. It sounds like she scaled based on those initial numbers.